Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada was always telling us the symptoms of Kshatriyas and the symptoms of Brahmanas, so that we'd understand the qualities of each. And it seems when we look at Srimad Bhagavatam, it's the interplay between Kshatriyas and Brahmanas that is really the matrix of the whole spiritual dynamic here. We find many great kings and many great Brahmanas. You know, when I was a young devotee and I came across a copy of Bhagavad Gita. It wasn't Srila Prabhupada's, but it was, I don't know whose it was, some tiny little purple edition. And I had heard that if you're interested in yoga, you should read Bhagavad Gita. It must have been about 1972, something like that. And I didn't know anything. And so I bought this Bhagavad Gita from some sort of hippie shop. And I read the first chapter. And it was all about elephants and horses and chariots and blowing on conches. And I thought, this has nothing at all to do with spirituality. Nothing at all to do with spiritual life. This is all about men fighting. And if we come to the Srimad Bhagavatam, we will also read a lot about kings. Because, you know, kings are very important. Executive heads of a government are very important because with the care, society goes on very nicely, and society becomes a breeding ground for spiritual thoughts and compassionate action. With a bad leader, someone who is not a Kshatriya, then thieves and rogues will increase and good people will be victimized. So there always has to be a good Kshatriya. So now, the qualities of a Kshatriya are that he should show bravery, courage in the face of danger. Prabhupada told the story of a king who was defeated in battle, and he came home on his horse, and his wife, the queen, was waiting inside, and he said, "Open up the door. It is such and such Singh, the king." And he heard his wife's voice. He said, "Who do you say you are?" He said, I am such and such, the king." And she said, no, that cannot possibly be. He said, "My husband would never come back from a battle. Either he would come back dead or he would have won. Go away. Whoever you are, you're not my husband." So Prabhupada told the story. The Kshatriya is brave to the point of death. So this bravery is very important for protecting society, because in protecting society, one has to take on elements which are challenging. I mean, social elements which are dangerous. You have to take on thieves and rogues and criminals and all kinds of enemies that a king who has to maintain his powerful position, there will always be those who want to take advantage of his powerful position and have it for themselves. And so a king is by nature, he sees friends and enemies. On the other hand, a Brahmin is taught not to see friends and enemies. So how could they be in the same room together? You may ask that question. But the relationship between the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas is so important that a Kshatriya cannot be a Kshatriya without having a Brahmin. And a Brahmin cannot be a Brahmin without having a Kshatriya. Oh, Kripamoya, what are you saying? Brahmanas are not swatantra, they're not independent? No, they're not. They never have been independent. The Vaishnavas have never been independent. They've been protected from unsavory elements in society. Temples have been built by kings, and stipends or donations have been given by kings to suitable Brahmins. So they have a mutual dependency between them. So a king must be brave, but he must also be compassionate. And these two things, they balance each other out. If there is bravery without compassion, then a king will be a ruthless tyrant. And if there's compassion without the sword, then the king will be vanquished very, very quickly. So both these qualities have to be there. In England, there is the top military academy is known as Sandhurst. It's south of London, and it's where the military officers are trained. So I was invited to go there, not to train as a military officer. That would have been a different life for me some time ago. I don't have that option now, but I was invited as a Brahmin, along with heads of different religions, because the subject in the British Army at the time, this was a couple of years ago, was how to have an ethical war. How to have an ethical war. We'd had some incidents of soldiers crossing the line, what they call the Geneva Convention, which is how you treat people in times of war, specifically how you treat prisoners. And it was wanted that some religious people were there to be consulted. So I spent a nice day completely surrounded by men in military uniform, and myself in my own Brahmin uniform. And so this is the nature of Kshatriyas, that they like to have Brahmins to help them to wage charitable, to wage compassionate or ethical warfare. So the principle of charity is very important equally for a Kshatriya. It is not that you just have power and then keep on having power and more power until you become crazy. Those who have power have to understand where it comes from. And in their power, they have to be magnanimous. They have to give in charity. And to give in charity means you must develop compassion. So a Kshatriya must develop compassion. Where does he get the compassion from? He gets it from his consultation with the Brahmins that he employs. This is a very real thing. So I had another talk, or I was present at another talk with someone called the Archbishop of Canterbury. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's the one who gets to do all the royal weddings. So the Archbishop of Canterbury is the head of the church. And he was giving a talk, and I was present at the talk. And he said the foundation of Western civilization, particularly Britain, well, he was speaking about Britain, not that it's not applicable in America as well, it is. But he said the foundation of civilized society is compassion for others and charity in action. Charity is compassion in action, he said. So I thought I would say that. But here's a difficulty. Sometimes in today's society, after many, many decades of people being animated by religious compassion to give in charity, sometimes governments say, let's make it easy on everyone. We'll take your taxes and we will convert your taxes into charity. So no one has to pay for the building of roads or the planting of trees or the delivery of water or food for the poor or medical help. We will do it all through your taxes. So that's a system that many of our governments in Western Europe have, and I'm sure yours as well, that everything's taken from taxes. The difficulty with this is sometimes your individual compunction to give in charity diminishes to the extent that the government takes taxes from you. You don't feel any personal connection with the poor because you know that somebody somewhere is going to be looking after them. Some government enterprise will care for them. The other thing which militates against compassion and charity is this idea that we have as devotees, a sort of a philosophical explaining away of the need for charity. Because when we see an unfortunate person, we think, oh, it's karma. It's their karma to be poor. It's their karma to be sick. they must have been bad people in their last life, which kind of means they're bad people in this life. Therefore, they're poor, sick, crazy, distressed, drug addicted. Therefore, it has nothing to do with me, how they recover in this world. And I know by talking to many devotees that this is a sort of preliminary understanding of karma. When we see the distress of another person, we should not think karma, but we should think dharma. It's a word that rhymes, but it's a word that means something else completely. So dharma means, karma means I'm analyzing, making a philosophical analysis, and the person is continuing in the suffering. Dharma means they're suffering. What am I going to do about it? How can I help? And sometimes as devotees, we want to give philosophy, but as my godbrother Hari Sori was talking yesterday on to the GBC strategic planning group. It was a talk about Prabhupada's disappearance, and he was talking about all the different times when Prabhupada said that prasadam distribution was the future of the movement. Now, of course, we've all heard the quotes that book distribution is the future of the movement. So what temple building is the future, and varnashram is the future. But unless people are eating, then no one has a future. So the main thing for a Kshatriya enterprise to think of is charity. And then I would even put my neck out here and saying the main thing is for a Brahminical-based organization like ISKCON is to get the Kshatriyas to be distributing food based on this notion that it's not necessarily the Brahmins who have to give the charity because they don't really have any, but the Kshatriyas should give in charity. And we've come to you today, my dear executive head of government, to ask you to please be a little more merciful to those people who are suffering on the streets of New York or London or Chicago like that. So my feeling is that such charity and the compassion that it stems from increases with clarity, meaning the mode of goodness. Somebody told me a story. He said 3 men walk into a forest. He said one is in the mode of ignorance, one is in the mode of passion, one is in the mode of goodness. He says the man who walks into the forest in the mode of ignorance, he's intoxicated. He just looks for a tree. He urinates against the tree. He falls asleep under another tree, and that's him, gone for the day. Another man who's in the mode of passion, he comes to exactly the same spot, and he looks around and he sees a tree that has fallen over, and he thinks to himself, I'll go home and get my chainsaw. I'll come and I'll get some logs. A man in the mode of goodness, he comes, and he sees the stream, and he sees the sunlight, he sees the butterflies, and he says, wouldn't this make a very nice nature trail for all the local children? I think I'll go to my local council and I'll make an arrangement whereby people can be uplifted by walking in nature. So 3 men, different modes, and they see different realities. So because a Kshatriya is always in the mode of passion, he has to be, that's his business, to be in the mode of passion. He requires the mode of goodness in the form of Brahmins. And if he has Brahmins close to him, then he has to pay them. Now, we have the qualities of a Brahmin given in the Bhagavad Gita, you know them. And Brahmins must uplift society. Brahmins are actually the head of society. And Brahmins, being the head, they prevent society from falling down completely. There is always in any society the chance that in 1, 2, 3 generations, the whole thing degenerates into animalism. And if you've done any reading of European culture, you will know that it doesn't take too long for human beings to become like animals. Usually the intoxicating formula is a king or a governor with no Brahmins, no ethical treatment of people, no compassion, no charity, and people become weak. They become prone to sense gratification of different kinds. They become prone to debauchery. And then society just becomes completely animalistic, and it unravels. So there must be some force to keep society in check. So normally, there's one, we have a person called the Speaker of the House of Parliament, the House of Commons. And they're usually very not noble men. That's down the corridor in the House of Lords. But they're usually quite thoughtful men. And this man was a little interested in Vedic philosophy. So he said, actually, if we analyze all the civilizations that have come and gone in Europe and the world over the years, we'll find that there was a progress from religion to gratifying of the senses to exploitation. And then unless the society returns to spirituality, it unravels. So I thought it was a very nice point. The whole business of Brahmins is to stop society unraveling. Unraveling means it just becomes confused. Therefore, our Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, would always say Brahmins are the head of society, and they're meant to give guidance. They're meant to be the eyes, whereas the Kshatriyas are just meant to be the arms. Now, here's the difficulty. What's my role? You may ask yourself, I'm a Vaishnava, I'm a devotee of Krishna. I don't know what this Kripamoya is talking about. Maybe he's got some notions that come from somewhere else. Because my motto in life is Naham Vipro na cha Narapatira Napi Vaisho na Shudro Naham Varanina Chagriya Patirano Vanasto Yatirava Kintu Prodyan Nikila Paramananda Purnamratabder Gopi Bhartur Parakamalayo Dasa Dasa Dasa. I am not a Brahmin, Kripamoya Das. I'm not a Kshatriya. I'm simply the servant of the servant of the servant of the gopis. And that is very good. Very good. This is what I would call your Paramatica identity. Paramatica means your higher self, your highest identity. If I come to, JFK Airport, Newark Airport, or any airport, and they say, where are you coming in from, sir? Suddenly they will speak to me, they'll see my British passport, and they'll say, how long are you going to be in the United States for, sir? And I say, well, I'm actually a spirit soul. I have no, you have to understand, I have no identity. I have no nationality. Please address me properly, my man. I'm a soul in transit. He'll say, security, and they'll have me taken away. This is my Paramatica identity, my highest identity as being a servant of Krishna. My Vyavaharika identity is I have a passport, this nation, I'm a man of a certain age. These are all identities. And it's this identity that we use in working in the world. So my identity may be Parakamalayo Radasa Dasa Nadasa, but my identity in the world means that as a Vaishnava, I am simultaneously a Brahmin, and I can give guidance to heads of society. I can give them instructions even. Sometimes we have to wait for it. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find the example of King Rahugana and the Brahmin Jad Bharat. And of course, you know the story. Jad Bharat was enlisted in taking the king's palanquin with another 3 men. And he didn't want to step on the ants, so the palanquin was bouncing around. And the King Rahugana said, he addressed him in some demeaning terms. So then Jad Bharat says, well, you think that you're the king, and you think that I'm a fool, but let me tell you a thing or two. And he told him, and then the king got out and he paid his obeisances to Jad Bharat. He said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were a self-realized soul. So you may go to Washington and you may want to give advice to the modern day kings. And you could try that technique, but they may not bow down before you. Or you could be very clever. You could try the technique of one, I forget his name, one Brahmin, South Indian Brahmin. And he was, what was it story? He was Yamunacharya. He had forgotten his identity. He was taking the role of a king. And a Brahmin said, how to make him remember that he's actually a devotee of Krishna. So he started by going to the kitchen, and he brought with him some spinach. Again, we turn to our charity and food. So he was cooking this delicious spinach. Now, normally, I'm not a man for spinach. I normally don't like it very much. I know that Popeye used to eat his spinach every day, and it would make him strong. I never ate spinach before I came to ISKCON, and I can't say I'm a great fan of spinach. But one time I went to Hungary as the guest of Shivaram Swami, and he served me a spinach that grows only in Hungary, and it was the tastiest vegetable I've ever had. And he served it to me every day. Anyway, I don't know whether my consciousness changed so much. But gradually, as this Brahmin was cooking the spinach and the king was eating the spinach, after 4 or 5 days, it stopped. And the king said, "Where's the spinach?" He said, "Oh, the Brahmin who was cooking it, he's either he'd stopped or he'd run out of spinach or something like that." So the king said, "Bring him here. I want to know I want to see the person who's been cooking for me." So he came before him. I think he was a relative. And he spoke to the king in such a way, now that he had the audience of the king, he was able to convince him. And of course, the commentators to that story, they say that spinach is very much in the mode of goodness. Because the king was eating in the mode of goodness, he was able to listen to the Brahmin. So there began a wonderful relationship between a Brahmin and a king. My dear devotees, even if you are a Brahmin, you must eat. Even if you are a Brahmin, you must be protected in some way from the animals in Kali Yuga society. So there must be a relationship between the Brahmins and the protectors and the Brahmins and the farmers. And normally that relationship comes in a procedure of exchange. I do something for you, you do something for me. That's how it is in any society. I teach your children and you give me potatoes. That's a fair exchange. I teach you how to run your country and you protect me from criminals or build the temple for me. This is a good relationship. So how you eat and how you are protected, that determines your role in society. As a Brahmin, you're able to enjoy these things, but only if you live a very austere life. You see, in Vedic culture, if you're a king, you get riches, you get wives, you get I used to live in Africa. I was living in Africa for a couple of years, and we had one devotee who joined the temple as a brahmachari, African brahmachari. And he was telling me about his life story. His father had 63 wives. And I was astonished. I said, "Your father's had 63 wives?" I thought that was only in the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. He said, "No, really for true." But he said there was a problem. I said, "What was the problem?" He said, "My father he had 63 daughters, 63 daughters, and he always wanted a son. And I am that son. And now I've broken my father's heart by becoming a brahmachari." So men who have lots of wives, men who have lots of money, men who have the land, men who have the power, who win the battles, they have to be governed by Brahmins. They still don't get to be the top of society. the king has to bow down to the Brahmins. So then the Brahmins are at the top of society. They get all the women, they get all the wine, they go hunting. You know, they have horses and chariots and palaces. They have all the power. Surely that's how it works. But no, if you're a Brahmin and you're meant to keep the king in check, you get to live in poverty. How about that? Therefore, all our stories in the Vedas begin. Once upon a time, there was a poor Brahmin. So you don't get to enjoy everything. No one can enjoy everything. It has to be kept in a state of equilibrium. If you have power, that power is balanced by knowledge that comes from your confidential mentors. If you are one of those mentors, your power is kept in check by making sure that you live in poverty. So the Brahmin's job is to make sure the king has all the money and keeps all the money. And the king's job is to make sure that the Brahmins live in poverty. Now, you wouldn't think that would be a very good relationship. You wouldn't think it would be a very good relationship, but it works. It works. So then we have the illustration of Channa Pandit. Channa Pandit. Chanakya, the king was looking for a good Brahmin. This is an apocryphal story. You won't find it in the Srimad Bhagavatam, so you can believe it or not believe it. But anyway, so Chanakya was observed by one of the king's spies. He came to a field, and someone had recently cut down kusha grass, which is used by Brahmins for different purposes. And when you cut down kusha grass, it leaves a very sharp stalk. He stepped on it and hurt himself. And, he came back and he went a long distance, and he came back with some milk, and he poured the milk on the kusha grass. So the spy who was watching him, he saw that this Brahmin is very, he's very determined. He would make a very good Brahmin for our king. And it was true. Channa Pandit got to be the chief Brahmin of the Maharaj Chandragupta of the Maurya dynasty. And his name comes down to us through history. Prabhupada tells it. At one time, Chanakya was observing some ants. The king had conquered a city. There was no one left. He observed some ants. And Chanakya saw that the ants were bringing sugar with them from down below. Chanakya said, "Burn the city." And the king said, "Why? I've just conquered the city. We get all these buildings." He said, "No, burn it." And when they burned the city, they found that the enemy army was all hidden underground. And if the king and his army had moved into the city, they would have all been slaughtered in the night. So a Brahmin is meant to be perceptive and is meant to be... how are we doing for time, Guru Sharan?
We have another 10 minutes, Prabhu.
We have another 10 minutes, okay. So there was a story of a king who wanted to weigh an elephant. And so different people came, and then a Brahmin came, and he said, "Okay, put the elephant." He said, "You see that boat out there?" He said, "Draw a line on the side of the boat. Now put the elephant in the boat and draw a line. Now bring the boat back and take the elephant out, and now put sandbags, the weight of which you know." So they put the sandbags in the boat until he said, "Now the exact weight of the elephant is this." And the king said, "Very good." He said, "You can be my Brahmin." Another Brahmin came to a king, and he did something for the king, and he said, the king said, now I'm a king, you're a Brahmin, let me give you a boon. A boon, what is a boon? Can you put it in a bucket? It's a wish. So the Brahmin said, "Yes." He said, "You see that chessboard over there that you play chess on?" He said, "Take all the pieces off." King did as he was asked. He said, "Now, all I want from you, my dear king, is 1 grain of rice on the first square on your chessboard. 2 grains of rice on the second square. 4 grains of rice on the third square." The king looked at him. He said, "You're crazy. You know who you're talking to? You're talking to the king, the Maharaj. I can give you anything you want. Right now, I'm happy with you. He said, but don't push me too far. He said, don't be a foolish Brahmin. So now, of course, by the time the king reached the 2/3 of the way down the chessboard, multiplying the grains of rice each time, he did not have enough rice in the kingdom to feed the Brahmin. And he looked at him and he said, you're so much smarter than me. He said, you have defeated me. Now you can become my top Brahmin. So if austerity is the wealth of the Brahmins, how are Brahmins supposed to make money? We have the 6 things that a Brahmin is meant to do: is yajna, patana, patana. You can study, you can teach, you can do samskars and pujas, and you can do those for other people. And only 2 of the 6 things really will win you any money. So and this is very practical, and I've been in situations in my own life where I've been faced with this question. You want to live as a Brahmin in Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, how are you supposed to maintain yourself? Well, if you live in the temple, someone will cook the meals and someone will get you, you're protected by the building and it's all for ISKCON and like that. But if you're an independent householder, firstly, as a householder means financially independent, spiritually dependent on the temple and your seniors, but financially you have to work your way in the world. So what is bona fide? What is authentic for a Vaishnav who wishes to live as a Brahmin? This is a great question. And answers on a postcard, please, to the following address. But we have, can I give talks? Well, if you give talks, then that's a Srimad Bhagavatam class. Can you pass around the hat after you've given a Srimad Bhagavatam class and everybody will give you a donation? No, we don't like that. Can I do a yagya for someone? Well, we don't like yagya because the Vedic hymns, therefore people who want to go to the heavenly planets. Samskaras are for those bogus Brahmins. So really the only way, we're not interested in a poor Brahmin, we're interested in poverty-stricken Brahmins who actually have nothing at all. But really, there has to be a way of living your entire life as a Brahmin and having people contribute to you. Otherwise, you see, people say, well, you give all the money to ISKCON and then ISKCON will pay for you. Sometimes that works, and sometimes if the temple president doesn't like you, then it doesn't work. So we've seen that as a application sometimes, but not all the time. And now many, many, many devotees are Brahmins, but of course they've never lived in a temple and they never will. It's just the way life goes. So how should they earn? We don't pay wages in ISKCON. We don't give bags of gold. We don't give land or villages. So we don't know any kings. So how are we supposed to live? Well, by what I call the Iodia Principle. In Iodia, we have the example that there were free Brahmins who didn't belong to a Brahminical assembly, but it is described that in Iodia, the capital of the kingdom of Koshala, where Maharaj Dasharatha was the king, it is said that every Brahmin was so well looked after that every Brahmin had 100 patrons, 100 people, 100 families would pay for each Brahmin. Now again, it doesn't mean that they got rich, but they had enough. Now, should you depend on Krishna? Yes, you should depend on Krishna, but that doesn't mean that you don't do anything. And that doesn't mean that you don't give anything. Because last time I looked, Krishna does not give gold coins raining from the sky. But through the agency of human beings, Krishna's arrangement for this world can be upheld. So in this verse, we're finding that the Kshatriya is being praised, that he comes in a great family that includes Prahlad Maharaj, the great moon in the sky of your family, Never has your family run from a battle, and never has your family run from giving a donation. It's just that in this case, the donation will be absolutely everything you have. I think we're going to read that story. So Hare Krishna, those are a few of my thoughts today, and I'll take a question or two if there is time. Hare Bol.